The night I finally understood that my family had already written me out of their lives was the night I was told not to attend my own sister's wedding. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. My mother said it the way she reminded me to bring a sweater or to lock the car. Calm, practical, final. Claire, it would be better if you didn't come. Your presence would complicate things. I remember standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring at a crack in the wall above the sink. I'd lived in that apartment for 3 years, ever since the divorce. Ever since I'd quietly accepted that my life wasn't going to look the way I thought it would at 32. I worked, I paid my bills, I kept my head down. I didn't ask for much, but I hadn't expected to be uninvited from my own sister's wedding. My name is Claire Whitman. I was 33 years old when my family decided, without a meeting or a warning, that I was no longer convenient to include. The wedding was in 3 weeks. A Saturday in late June at a restored vineyard outside Napa. I knew because I'd helped Emily pick the venue 2 years earlier, back when she still called me for advice and laughed at my jokes and told people I was her best friend. That version of our relationship had ended quietly, like a light turned off in another room. Complicate how? I asked my mother. My voice sounded steady, even to me. There was a pause. I could hear dishes clinking in the background, the television murmuring. Normal life. Her life. Well, she said, choosing her words carefully. Your father and I feel that, given everything that's happened, it might be uncomfortable for some people. What people? Another pause. Longer this time. Daniel's family, she said finally. And, well, your father. That was when I understood. This wasn't really about the wedding. It was about containment. Daniel was my sister's fiancé. He came from money. Old California money. Vineyards, trusts, summer homes in Carmel. His parents were generous in a way that felt performative, like philanthropy was a language they used to signal superiority. They were also deeply interested in appearances, and appearances were something my family had decided I no longer helped maintain. What exactly has happened, I asked, that makes me inappropriate for a wedding? My mother sighed. Claire, you know it's been a difficult few years. For them, maybe. 2 years earlier, my marriage had ended, after I discovered my husband had been quietly funneling money out of our joint account to support a second life I hadn't known existed. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I filed paperwork. I hired a lawyer. I walked away with less than I deserved because I wanted it over. The divorce hadn't been scandalous. It had been inconvenient. Then, 8 months after that, my father and I had a disagreement that no one in my family ever referred to as what it was. A severing. He and my mother owned a small logistics company in Sacramento. Family business. I'd worked there part-time during college, full-time after graduation, then stepped back when I got married and moved. After the divorce, I returned. Not because I wanted to reclaim something, but because I needed stability. I brought in 2 new clients within my first 6 months. Modernized their billing system, cut costs, increased revenue. My father thanked me by promoting my younger brother, Mark, to operations director. Mark was 28. He'd never worked outside the company. He showed up late and left early and treated the staff like props. But he was reliable, my father said. He was family. When I questioned the decision privately, my father looked at me like I'd violated an unspoken rule. You're too emotional, he said. You've been through a lot. This company needs steadiness. I resigned 2 weeks later. After that, the invitation stopped. Sunday dinners became busy weekends. Group texts went unanswered. Emily still called occasionally, but our conversations became shallow, careful. She never asked how I was really doing. And now, standing in my kitchen, listening to my mother explain why my existence was a problem, I realized the pattern hadn't been accidental. I won't make anyone uncomfortable, I said. I'll sit in the back. I won't talk to anyone. I just want to be there. That's exactly the problem, my mother replied. You don't understand. You don't know how to blend right now. There it was. I'm not an embarrassment, I said quietly. No one said that. You didn't have to. Silence stretched between us. I imagined my mother standing at her counter, phone tucked between her shoulder and ear, nodding to herself. She had always believed that keeping the peace meant choosing the side with the most power. "Emily agrees," she said at last. That was the sentence that hurt the most. "I see," I said. "We'll celebrate with you another time," my mother added quickly. "Just family, something small." I almost laughed. I didn't. "Okay," I said instead. "If that's what you want, it's what's best." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't feel shocked. What I felt was something colder and clearer. I felt excluded, not by accident, not by misunderstanding, by design. That night, I opened a file on my laptop. I titled it simply, Whitman. Inside it, I began to list dates, conversations, decisions, promotions given, promises made and quietly withdrawn, assets I knew existed, accounts I'd once had access to, documents I remembered seeing, long before I understood their significance. I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. I was doing something far more dangerous. I was paying attention. And as I typed, one thought kept repeating in my mind, steady and unyielding. If they were willing to erase me this easily, then they had underestimated what I knew. The morning after my mother told me not to attend Emily's wedding, I woke up before my alarm and lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muted sounds of my apartment building coming to life. A neighbor's shower, someone's footsteps in the hallway, a car starting outside. Ordinary noises. The kind of life sounds that remind you the world keeps moving, whether you're included or not. I didn't feel angry yet. That came later. What I felt was alert. There's a moment when you've been pushed aside enough times, when something inside you stops hoping and starts recording. That was where I was now. I went to work as usual. I was a senior compliance analyst at a mid-sized healthcare logistics firm downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and stability had become my currency. My job required attention to detail, patience, and an ability to read what people weren't saying. I was good at it. Too good, according to my last performance review, which had ended with my manager joking that I could probably run the place if I wanted to. That day, I found it hard to focus. My mind kept drifting back to my family, replaying moments I'd once dismissed as minor. The Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago, when my father handed Mark the keys to a new company car at the table and told him, "You've earned this," while I was asked to help clear plates. The Christmas Emily forgot my birthday entirely, then laughed it off with, "Oh my God, you know I'm terrible with dates." The time my mother told me, gently, that maybe I shouldn't talk about my divorce so openly, because people don't always understand women who can't make marriages work. I'd internalized all of it as timing, stress, miscommunication. But now, with the wedding looming and my absence already decided, the pattern sharpened into something undeniable. At lunch, I called my friend Nina. She was a family law attorney I'd met years earlier through my ex-husband, and she had remained in my life long after he hadn't. "Tell me exactly what she said," Nina told me after I explained the situation. I repeated my mother's words as closely as I could. The pauses, the careful phrasing. When I finished, Nina was quiet for a moment. "They're managing risk," she said finally. "What kind of risk?" "The kind that comes from someone who knows the truth," she replied. "Or someone who doesn't fit the narrative they're selling." "What narrative?" Nina didn't hesitate. "That everything is fine, that the family is solid, that the business is clean, that there are no fractures." I stared out the office window at the traffic below. "I haven't done anything," I said. "That's usually not the point," Nina said. "Control doesn't require wrongdoing. It just requires unpredictability." After we hung up, I went back to my desk and pulled up LinkedIn. I searched Daniel's name. Daniel Hartwell, investment management, partner at a private equity firm with a polished website and a long list of philanthropic board positions. I scrolled through photos of him and Emily at charity galas, fundraisers, vineyard events. She always looked perfect. Soft curls, tasteful dresses, her hand resting lightly on his arm. There was no room in those photos for a sister who'd divorced badly and quit the family business on principle. That evening, I stopped by my parents' house unannounced. It was a beige 2-story colonial in a quiet Sacramento suburb. I'd grown up there. I knew which floorboard creaked on the stairs, which cabinet stuck in the kitchen. I also knew my parents hated surprises. My mother opened the door and froze when she saw me. "Claire," she said, forcing a smile. "You should have called." "I was nearby," I said. "I just wanted to talk." She stepped aside reluctantly. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and something baking. Normal. Comfortable. My father was in the living room, watching the news. He didn't look up when I entered. "We need to discuss the wedding," I said. My father muted the television with a sharp click. "There's nothing to discuss." "I want to hear it from you," I said. "Why I'm not welcome." He leaned back in his chair, hands folded over his stomach. He looked tired, or maybe practiced. "Emily is starting a new chapter," he said. "We don't need distractions." "I'm not a distraction," I replied. "You are right now," he said, evenly. My mother hovered near the doorway, arms crossed, eyes flicking between us. "Is this about the company?" I asked. My father's jaw tightened. "That's in the past." "Is it?" "You walked away," he said. "You made that choice." "I walked away because you undermined me," I said. "You gave my role to Mark without even telling me." My father shrugged. Mark was the better fit. "For optics," I said before I could stop myself. "That did it." My father stood abruptly. "Watch your tone." I met his eyes. "I have." The silence that followed was heavy, charged. My mother finally spoke. "Claire, you're sensitive," she said. "You take things personally." I nodded slowly. "And you avoid them entirely." My father turned away, picking up the remote again. "This conversation is over." I looked at both of them, really looked. The set of their shoulders, the way neither of them asked how I was doing, the way my presence seemed to irritate rather than concern them. "Okay," I said. As I walked toward the door, my mother called after me. "We love you," she said, quickly, automatically. I paused, hand on the doorknob. "I know," I said, "but love isn't the same as loyalty." That night, I added more to the file on my laptop. Names, dates, financial structures I remembered from my time at the company. Conversations overheard late at night when my parents thought I was asleep. One line in particular stood out as I typed it. Grandmother's Trust. Modified, 2016. I didn't know exactly what it meant yet, but I was starting to understand why my family was suddenly so eager to keep me out of sight. And for the first time, I wondered what else they were hiding. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was upset, but because my mind wouldn't slow down. Once you start seeing the structure beneath the surface of your own family, it's hard to stop tracing the lines. The phrase my father had used kept looping in my head. "For optics." That was the word he hadn't said out loud, but it was the one that explained everything. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and drove to the county records office. I told myself I was just being thorough, curious, responsible. But the truth was simpler. I wanted to know how far back the exclusion went, and how deliberately it had been planned. The building was nondescript, tucked between a tax office and a strip mall. Fluorescent lights, numbered windows, the quiet hum of bureaucracy. I took a ticket and waited, surrounded by people flipping through folders, checking their phones, waiting for answers to questions that mattered deeply to them and no one else. When my number was called, I stepped up and asked to access public trust and property records associated with my grandmother's estate. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses perched low on her nose, nodded and typed my request into the system without looking up. "Name?" she asked. "Margaret Whitman," I said. "Deceased." She paused, looked at me. "Relation?" "Granddaughter." Something softened in her expression. "I'll pull what I can." While the printer whirred behind her, I thought about my grandmother. Margaret Whitman had been precise in a way I hadn't appreciated when I was younger. She kept handwritten ledgers, labeled envelopes. She never raised her voice, but when she spoke, people listened. She had also, quietly, never trusted my father completely. When the clerk handed me the documents, it was more than I expected. Deeds, amendments, a copy of a trust modification filed 7 years earlier. I thanked her and moved to a small table near the window, spreading the papers out slowly, carefully. The trust had originally been evenly divided between my father and his 2 siblings, but the modification told a different story. My grandmother had created a secondary beneficiary clause, contingent, specific. In the event of misconduct, mismanagement, or breach of fiduciary duty by the primary beneficiary, The trustee was authorized to redirect assets to named alternates. My name was there, not prominently, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Claire Ann Whitman, contingent beneficiary. I felt a tightening in my chest that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite relief. This wasn't an accident. 7 years ago, my grandmother had anticipated something. Maybe not this exact scenario, but enough to plan for it. And my father knew. That realization reframed everything. The tension, the sudden promotions, the careful distancing, the way my opinions had gone from tolerated to inconvenient. I drove home in silence, the papers tucked safely in my bag. That afternoon, I received a text from Emily. "Hey, Mom said you stopped by. Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "I'm fine. Just needed clarity." There was a pause. Then 3 dots appeared. "You didn't need to make things harder right now," she wrote. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Nina again. "Hypothetically," I said, once she picked up, "if someone were a contingent beneficiary on a trust, and the primary beneficiary was behaving in ways that could be interpreted as misconduct, what would that look like legally?" Nina exhaled slowly. "Hypothetically, it would depend on evidence, paper trails, financial decisions, breaches of duty. And if the primary beneficiary knew about the contingency, then they'd likely try to minimize the contingent party's involvement or access," she said. "Why?" I told her about the trust. She was quiet for a long time. "Claire," she said finally, "this isn't just family drama. This is asset protection." That night, my brother Mark called me for the first time in months. "Hey," he said, too casually. "Mom said you've been asking questions." "I've been listening," I replied. He laughed, but there was an edge to it. "You always did overthink things." "Did I?" "You're not coming to the wedding," he said. "That's settled. Don't turn it into something bigger." "I'm not," I said. "You are." He scoffed. "You really think you're entitled to everything just because Grandma liked you?" "I think," I said slowly, "that entitlement is an interesting word for someone who was handed a job he didn't earn." Silence. "You walked away," he said. "I was pushed," I replied. "There's a difference." He lowered his voice. "Just stay out of it, Claire. This family doesn't need more problems." I almost told him about the trust. Almost told him that the problems already existed and had names and signatures. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "I already am." After we hung up, I opened my laptop again. The Whitman file had grown thick with notes and scanned documents. At the bottom of the page, I typed a new heading. Next steps. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't planning confrontation or revenge. I was doing something quieter. I was positioning myself. Because once you understand that love has been used as leverage, you stop negotiating emotionally. You start preparing legally. And as I closed the file and shut down my computer, one thought settled calmly in my mind. They thought excluding me would keep me harmless. They were wrong. The first thing I did was nothing. That sounds counterintuitive, but restraint is often the most unsettling move you can make. My family expected panic, explanations, maybe even a dramatic plea for reconciliation. When none of that came, the silence created its own pressure. I went to work. I met my deadlines. I smiled in meetings. I let the days pass. Meanwhile, I watched. 2 days after my brother's call, my mother posted a photo on Facebook. Emily and Daniel at their engagement party, champagne glasses raised, sunlight spilling over a terrace I recognized immediately. The caption read, "Family is everything." I didn't react. I didn't comment. I didn't even scroll past it quickly. I studied the image the way I studied contracts at work, looking for what was present and what had been carefully cropped out. Then, late that night, I got an email. Subject line, "Quick question, from Daniel Hartwell." We had never communicated directly before. "Claire, I hope you're well. I know things have been busy leading up to the wedding, and I wanted to reach out personally. There's been some confusion, and I'd really appreciate the chance to clear the air. Perhaps we could talk sometime this week? Best, Daniel." I read it twice. Confusion. Clear the air. Language designed to sound neutral while asserting authority. I recognized it immediately. I use similar phrasing when vendors tried to renegotiate contracts after missing deadlines. I didn't reply that night. Instead, I forwarded the email to Nina with a single line. Thoughts? Her response came back within minutes. Do not speak to him without understanding why he wants to speak to you. This isn't about feelings. The next day, I ran into an old colleague at lunch. Paula had worked in accounting at my parents' company for nearly 15 years before retiring early. She spotted me in a cafe near the office and waved me over like we were old friends, which, in a way, we were. You look thinner, she said, sitting down. Stress? Clarity, I replied. She laughed. Then she leaned in. I heard you left the company on bad terms, she said quietly. Did you? She hesitated. I heard Mark's been signing things he shouldn't be. My heart rate didn't spike. It steadied. What kind of things? Paula glanced around the cafe. Vendor contracts, expense approvals. He's sloppy. Always has been. Your father used to clean it up. Now. She shrugged. People notice. I nodded, filing the information away. That evening, I finally replied to Daniel. Happy to talk. Let me know what you'd like to discuss. He responded almost immediately. Great. Maybe coffee tomorrow? Somewhere near downtown? I suggested a quiet hotel lounge instead. Neutral ground. Public, but controlled. He agreed. The next afternoon, Daniel arrived precisely on time. He was taller than I remembered, impeccably dressed. The kind of man who looked like he belonged anywhere expensive. Claire, he said, standing to shake my hand. Thank you for meeting with me. Of course, I said, taking a seat. We ordered drinks. Polite conversation followed. Work, weather, the vineyard. Then he leaned back slightly and folded his hands. I'll be direct, he said. There are concerns. I waited. Your parents are under a lot of pressure right now, he continued. The wedding, the business, the merging of families. Stress does strange things to people. So I've noticed, I said. He smiled tightly. They're worried about instability. And that involves me how? He chose his next words carefully. There are financial entanglements that could be misinterpreted if certain narratives resurface. Narratives. I took a sip of my drink. Are you asking me not to attend the wedding? I asked. Or not to exist? His smile faltered. Claire, he said, lowering his voice, this family is entering a new phase. Visibility matters. I'm very visible, I said. Just not where you'd prefer. He leaned forward. I'm offering you an opportunity to step back gracefully. Avoid unnecessary conflict. And in return, he hesitated. There could be considerations. There it was. What kind of considerations? I asked. Support, he said. Discretion. I met his eyes. You're asking me to be bought. He flushed. That's not what I said. It is, I replied calmly. You're just using better lighting. He stood abruptly. I think we're done here. So do I said. After he left, I sat alone for a while, replaying the conversation. It confirmed what I'd suspected. My absence wasn't about family harmony. It was about controlling exposure. That night, I called Nina again and told her everything. They're scared, she said when I finished. That's good. Fear makes people sloppy. What do I do? You document, she said, and you don't tip your hand. Before bed, I opened the Whitman file again. I added Daniel's email, notes from the meeting, Paula's comments. Then I added a new section, leverage, because I was no longer just excluded. I was being managed. And that meant they believed I had something they couldn't afford to lose. Once you realize you're being managed, everything looks different. The next week unfolded with a strange, almost artificial calm. No calls from my parents, no follow-up from Daniel. Emily didn't text. It was as if my family had collectively decided that if they ignored me long enough, I might simply dissolve. They underestimated my patience. On Wednesday morning, I received a calendar invite at work. No subject line, just a time block from 12 to 1 p.m. The sender was my father's company email address. I didn't accept it. I didn't decline it either. At 11:58, my phone rang. Claire, my father said, skipping any pretense of warmth. Did you get my invite? I did, I replied. We need to talk. I agree, I said. About what specifically? There was a pause, then a sigh. You've been stirring things up. I've been quiet, I said. That's what seems to be bothering everyone. This isn't the time for games, he said. There are sensitive matters in motion. Then you should have been more careful with them, I replied. His voice hardened. You're not part of this anymore. That sentence, more than any other, confirmed everything. I resigned, I said. I didn't sign a vow of silence. We gave you opportunities, he said. You gave Mark my work, I corrected. There's a difference. He exhaled sharply. What do you want? I almost laughed. The same question, the same framing. As if the only reason someone could resist control was because they wanted something in return. I want the truth, I said. And I want it documented. About what? About the trust, I said. And about why everyone seems so invested in pretending I don't exist. Silence stretched across the line. You've been digging, he said finally. I've been learning, I replied. You don't understand how these things work, he said. You'll only make it worse. For who? I asked. He didn't answer. That afternoon, I did something I should have done years earlier. I scheduled a consultation with a forensic accountant. Her name was Lila Perez. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense demeanor. She specialized in family-owned businesses and trust disputes. Nina had recommended her with a single sentence. She doesn't get sentimental. We met in her office, a clean, quiet space filled with whiteboards and neatly stacked files. I laid out what I knew. My time at the company, Mark's promotion, the trust documents, Paula's comment about sloppy signing. Lila listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes. Do you have access to any historical financials? She asked. Some, I said. Old backups, emails, reports I was CC'd on. Good, she said. Because from what you're describing, there's likely commingling. Between what and what? Between the company and the trust, she said, and possibly personal expenses. My stomach tightened. That's serious, I said. It's common, she replied, especially when people believe no one is watching. That evening, Emily finally called. Her voice was strained, brittle around the edges. Why are you doing this? Doing what? I asked. Talking to Dad, to Daniel. Digging into things that don't concern you. They concern me, I said. I'm part of this family whether you acknowledge it or not. You're making this about you, she snapped. This is my wedding. I was uninvited from it, I said calmly. You made it about me. She was quiet for a moment. Daniel's parents are nervous, she said. They don't like uncertainty. Then they shouldn't build their lives on half-truths, I replied. You're going to ruin everything, she said, her voice breaking. Why can't you just let things be? I closed my eyes. Because letting things be is how I ended up. Erased. She hung up. That night, as I reviewed old emails and financial spreadsheets, I found something small but telling. A series of expense reimbursements approved by Mark for consulting services rendered by a shell LLC I didn't recognize. The amounts weren't huge. 5 figures, spread out. Easy to miss. Easy to rationalize. But they all trace back to one account. An account connected to the trust. I sat back in my chair, heart steady, mind clear. This wasn't just favoritism. It wasn't just exclusion. It was misuse. And misuse changes the rules. I saved the files, backed them up twice, and labeled the folder carefully. Evidence. Because now, the situation had shifted. They weren't just managing me anymore. They were exposed. And they didn't know how close I was to the switch that could turn their careful illusion into a matter of record. The moment you uncover evidence, you feel a temptation to act immediately, to confront, to expose, to force the truth into the open and watch everything burn. I didn't. Instead, I slowed down even more. That was the hardest part. Knowing I was holding something that mattered, something that could shift the balance, and choosing not to use it yet. Power isn't loud, it waits. Over the next 10 days, I worked quietly with Lila. I forwarded her documents in batches, careful not to create digital patterns that could be traced back too easily. Old spreadsheets, vendor invoices, emails where language was vague enough to hide intent, but specific enough to establish knowledge. She called me late one evening. There's a pattern, she said. It's not massive fraud, but it's consistent. The kind that adds up over time. Enough to matter legally? I asked. Yes, she said, especially in the context of a trust. Trustees have a fiduciary duty. Even the appearance of self-dealing is serious. I closed my eyes. So what happens now? That depends, she said. Do you want accountability or leverage? I didn't answer right away. Meanwhile, The wedding drew closer. Invitations were posted on social media, dress fittings, bridal showers. Emily tagged photos with captions like, "Counting down," and "Forever starts soon." People commented with hearts and congratulations. I remained invisible. 2 days before the wedding, my mother called. Her voice was softer than it had been in weeks. Careful. "Claire," she said, "we need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied. "We're worried about you," she said. "You seem unsettled." I almost smiled. "That's an interesting choice of word." "Your father is under a lot of stress," she continued. "This isn't a good time for conflict." "Then it's fortunate," I said, "that I didn't create any." She sighed. "Daniel mentioned you met." "Yes." He felt the conversation was tense. "He attempted to negotiate my silence," I said. I declined. "That's not how he meant it," she said quickly. "It's exactly how he meant it," I replied. Silence again. "What do you want?" she asked, finally. I leaned back against my kitchen counter, looking out the window at the city lights. "I want transparency," I said, "and I want it in writing." "About the trust?" she asked. "And the company," I said, "and the reasons I was excluded from this family's decisions." Her voice dropped. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I said. "I'm being precise." The next morning, I received an email from my father's lawyer. It was short, polite, vague. They requested a meeting the following week to address outstanding misunderstandings. Nina replied first. "This is escalation. Do not attend alone." Lila followed with a single line. "They're trying to contain exposure before the wedding." I felt a flicker of something then. Not fear, not anger, momentum. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Emily showed up at my apartment. She looked nothing like the glowing bride from Instagram. Her eyes were red, her posture tight. "I didn't know," she said the moment I opened the door. "About what?" I asked. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "About the money," she said. "About Dad and Mark." I closed the door slowly. "What do you know?" I asked. She paced the small living room. "Daniel told me they were worried you might misunderstand some things. So I asked questions. And then I saw emails. Not everything, but enough." "And?" I said. "And I don't understand why you didn't tell me," she said, her voice cracking. I met her eyes. "You didn't ask," she flinched. "I thought you were just bitter," she said. "After the divorce. After leaving the company." "I was hurt," I said. "There's a difference." She sat down heavily on the couch. "I don't want my wedding to be about this," she said. "It already is," I replied gently. "You just weren't told." She looked up at me then. Really looked. "What are you going to do?" I considered her carefully. Emily had benefited from the system without understanding it. She wasn't innocent, but she wasn't the architect either. "I'm going to protect myself," I said. "And I'm going to stop pretending exclusion is love." She nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can stop this," she said. "But I don't want to lose you." I believed she meant it. And that was the problem, because belief doesn't undo damage. As she left, she turned back. "They're terrified," she said. "Dad especially." I closed the door behind her and rested my forehead against it for a moment. Good. Because fear meant they finally understood something fundamental. I was no longer asking to belong. I was deciding how much access they deserved. And with the wedding 48 hours away, the window for quiet containment was closing fast. The day of the wedding arrived without me. I knew the schedule because I'd helped plan parts of it long before I became inconvenient. Noon ceremony, vineyard lunch, sunset reception. Everything timed, everything curated. Even the weather cooperated, or at least that's what the photos later suggested. I spent that morning at my dining table, with 2 laptops open and a legal pad between them. This was not a dramatic day. No shouting, no last-minute confrontations, just decisions. At 9:12 a.m., Lila emailed me a summary memo. Clear, clinical, carefully worded. Preliminary findings indicate repeated transfers from Whitman Logistics operating accounts to a third-party LLC with no documented services rendered. Funds appear to benefit a trust-connected account. Pattern suggests misuse of company assets and breach of fiduciary duty by acting officers. I read it twice. Then, Nina called. "They're scrambling," she said. "Your father's lawyer reached out again. They want to move the meeting up, tomorrow." After the wedding, I said. Yes, she replied, which tells you everything. I looked down at the legal pad. I'd drawn a simple line down the center of the page. On one side, I'd written quiet resolution. On the other, formal action. Until that morning, I'd kept both columns open. Now I crossed one out. Schedule the meeting, I told Nina, but not at their office. Where? At yours, I said. And I want everything documented. She didn't ask why. At 11:30 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Daniel. I shouldn't have been surprised. I hope today hasn't been difficult for you. I know emotions are running high. Perhaps after the honeymoon, we can revisit things calmly. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to Nina and added it to the file. At noon, while Emily was walking down the aisle, I was on a video call with Lila. One more thing, she said. There's a timing issue you should be aware of. What kind? If the trust administrator becomes aware of potential misuse and doesn't act, they become liable, she explained. That means once you formally notify them, things move quickly. And if I don't? Then the behavior continues, she said, and so does your exposure. I thanked her and ended the call. At 12:47 p.m., I drafted an email to Trust Administration Office. Subject: Notice of potential breach of fiduciary duty. I didn't send it yet. I let it sit in drafts because timing matters. At 3:06 p.m., Emily texted me a photo. It was her and Daniel, smiling, glasses raised. The caption underneath read, "We did it." Below that, just for me, I wish she were here. I stared at the image for a long time. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt clarity. At 3:14 p.m., I sent the email. The trust administrator replied within 20 minutes, acknowledging receipt and requesting a formal meeting. That was the moment everything shifted from personal to procedural. At 6:30 p.m., my mother called. Her voice was tight, brittle beneath forced cheer. "Where are you?" she asked. "At home," I said. "People are asking about you." "I'm sure they are. Daniel's parents are confused," she continued. "This isn't how families handle things." "This is exactly how families like ours handle things," I replied. Quietly, until they can't. She lowered her voice. "What did you do?" "I stopped waiting," I said. She hung up. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my balcony, watching the city lights blink on one by one. Somewhere in Napa, my family was dancing under string lights, pretending nothing was wrong. But something had changed. The next morning, the consequences arrived. My father called at 7:03 a.m. I let it ring. Mark texted at 7:05. "We need to talk. Now." At 7:11, my father's lawyer emailed again. "Urgent. Please confirm today's meeting." At 8 a.m., the trust administrator emailed to confirm receipt of documentation and formally notified all primary beneficiaries of an inquiry. That was when the silence broke. Emily called at 8:17, sobbing. "What did you do?" she asked. "I told the truth," I said. "You've ruined everything." "No," I replied. I stopped lying. By noon, the wedding photos were still circulating online. But behind the scenes, the machine was grinding to a halt. Accounts were flagged, transactions frozen pending review. My father's authority, which had gone unquestioned for decades, was suddenly provisional. That afternoon, I received one final message from Daniel. This didn't have to happen this way. I typed a response, then deleted it. Some things don't need answers. At 5 p.m., I met Mina in her office to prepare for the next day. She looked at me across the conference table. "You're aware," she said, "that once this proceeds, there's no going back." "I know," I said. "You may lose them." I nodded. I already did. As I left her office, I realized something important. The wedding had been the deadline they thought would control me. Instead, it had clarified me. Because exclusion had taught me something I should have learned years ago. Belonging that depends on silence isn't belonging. It's a contract. And tomorrow, I was done honoring it. The meeting took place the next morning at 9 sharp in Nina's office. No flowers, no pleasantries, no family photos on the walls. Just a long table, neutral lighting, and a recorder placed carefully in the center, its red light already on. My father arrived first, 10 minutes early. He looked older than he had the week before, his confidence dulled by something new and unfamiliar: uncertainty. Mark came in next, jaw tight, eyes darting. He didn't look at me. My mother followed, clutching her purse like a shield. She took the seat farthest from me. Their lawyer arrived last, brisk and professional. A man who had clearly been brought in to clean things up, not to ask questions. Nina nodded to everyone and closed the door. "Let's begin," she said. No one spoke. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Claire," he said, forcing a smile, "this has gotten out of hand." "That's one way to describe it," I replied. His lawyer leaned forward. "We're here to resolve misunderstandings," he said, "not to escalate." Nina's voice was calm. "An inquiry has already been initiated by the trust administrator. This meeting is informational." Mark shifted in his chair. "You didn't have to do this," he muttered. "I did," I said. "You left me no alternative." My father's eyes flashed. "You could have come to us." "I did," I replied. "You told me I wasn't part of this family." Silence fell again. Nina slid a folder across the table. "These are preliminary findings prepared by a forensic accountant," she said. "They indicate repeated transfers from Whitman Logistics to a shell LLC with no legitimate business purpose." The lawyer skimmed the pages, his expression tightening. "These transactions were approved by Mr. Whitman Jr., Nina continued, with oversight from Mr. Whitman Sr. My father straightened. "I trusted my son." "That trust doesn't absolve responsibility," Nina said. My mother spoke for the first time. "This is about money now?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. "It's always been about money," I said quietly. "You just called it family." Mark slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. Everyone does this." "That's not a defense," Nina replied. The lawyer leaned back, fingers steepled. "Let's talk about intent," he said. "There was no malicious intent here." "Intent matters less than duty," Nina said, "especially when a trust is involved." My father's voice cracked. "What do you want?" There it was again. I looked at him steadily. "I want to be removed from the pattern." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I want formal separation," I said, "from the company, from any fiduciary exposure. And I want my status as contingent beneficiary acknowledged in writing." The lawyer blinked. "That's unusual." "So was being erased from my sister's wedding," I said. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "You're tearing this family apart." "No," I replied. "I'm refusing to be used to hold it together." Nina slid another document forward. "This outlines proposed terms," she said. "Voluntary disclosure to the trust administrator, restructuring of company oversight, and a binding agreement recognizing Claire's rights and limiting liability." Mark scoffed. "You think you deserve this?" I met his gaze. "I think I deserve not to be punished for your choices." The lawyer turned to my father. "This is serious," he said quietly. "If the inquiry proceeds without cooperation, consequences could be severe." My father closed his eyes. For the first time, he looked small. "We need time," he said. "You've had years," I replied. The meeting adjourned, without resolution. But something had changed. As we stood to leave, my father stopped me. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. I looked at him. Really looked. "Intent doesn't erase impact," I said. "And silence isn't love." He had no answer. That afternoon, the trust administrator emailed again. Formal audit initiated. By evening, my parents' house felt very far away. Emily texted late that night. "I don't know where I fit anymore." I typed, then erased, then finally replied. "You fit where you're honest." She didn't respond. I went to bed that night knowing the hardest part wasn't over. But the direction was set. They could no longer pretend I was invisible. And they could no longer pretend this was just family drama. It was a matter of record now. Once something becomes a matter of record, it stops belonging to anyone emotionally. That's what my family didn't understand. In the days following the meeting, everything moved with a cold efficiency that felt almost surreal. Emails replaced phone calls. Lawyers replaced parents. Language became precise, stripped of sentiment. My father stopped calling altogether. Mark sent one last message, short and venomous. "You always wanted this." I didn't reply. Because wanting dignity isn't the same as wanting destruction. On Tuesday morning, Lila forwarded me an updated report. The audit had expanded. What began as a narrow inquiry into questionable transfers was now a broader review of governance practices at Whitman Logistics. The administrator flagged inconsistencies going back 4 years, she wrote. This is no longer containable. I sat at my desk at work, reading the report while my colleagues chatted nearby about weekend plans and office gossip. No one there knew that my family's carefully constructed image was unraveling one document at a time. At noon, Nina called. They've agreed to most of your terms, she said. Most? They want you to waive future claims in exchange for formal recognition and separation, she said. Standard tactic. I won't, I said without hesitation. I expected that, she replied. I told them as much. That afternoon, my mother showed up at my apartment again. This time, she didn't knock. I opened the door to find her standing there, eyes red, mouth tight. You've humiliated us, she said. I stepped aside to let her in. Sit down. She didn't. Do you know what people are saying? She demanded. Your aunt called. Your cousin won't answer my texts. I leaned against the counter. That's what happens when secrets become public. She finally looked at me then, not as a daughter, but as a variable she could no longer control. You could have stopped this, she said, at any point. Yes, I said. So could you. Her voice dropped. We did what we had to do to keep the family stable. You sacrificed me, I said. That wasn't stability. That was convenience. She shook her head. You've always been difficult. I smiled faintly. No, I've always been observant. She left without saying goodbye. The next escalation came from an unexpected direction. Daniel's parents requested a meeting, not with me, with the trust administrator. That alone told me how deeply things had shifted. The wedding glow had faded fast. Reputation, once threatened, demanded immediate defense. Emily called that night. They're fighting, she said. Daniel and his parents. About money. About disclosures. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry. No, you're not, she said quietly. No, I admitted. I'm not. She was silent for a moment. Dad says you planned this, she said. I planned not to disappear, I replied. Everything else followed naturally. Another pause. I don't know who to believe anymore, she said. Believe actions, I said. They're more honest than words. 2 days later, the board of Whitman Logistics announced an internal review. Mark was placed on temporary leave, pending investigation. My father stepped down for health reasons. The language was careful. The meaning wasn't. I found out the same way everyone else did. A press release. A short article in a local business journal. Family-run logistics firm faces governance review amid restructuring. No names, no accusations. But the silence around my father's role spoke volumes. That evening, I went for a long walk. The city felt different, quieter, like a held breath finally released. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't grieving. I was adjusting. Because when you stop being the one who absorbs the damage, the system has to redistribute it somewhere else. And systems don't like that. At home, I opened my laptop and drafted one final document. Not legal, not strategic, personal. It wasn't a letter I planned to send. It was a boundary, written clearly enough that I wouldn't forget it when nostalgia tried to soften the past. I wrote, I was excluded to protect an image. I was silenced to preserve comfort. I was only remembered when my absence became a liability. I saved the file and closed the laptop. The next day, Nina called with an update. They're ready to sign, she said. All of it. Good, I replied. And Claire, she added, you should know, this will permanently change how they see you. I looked out my window at the street below. People moving through their lives, unaware of the quiet shifts happening everywhere. All the time. They already did, I said. What they were only just realizing was that I no longer needed to be seen by them at all. The documents arrived on a Thursday afternoon, bound neatly in a folder that felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. Nina didn't dramatize it. She never did. They agreed, she said. All material points. I took the folder from her hands and set it on the table between us. I didn't open it right away. Outside her office window, traffic moved steadily, indifferent. People were late to meetings, early for dinner, stuck in the middle of lives that had nothing to do with mine. And yet this moment felt like a hinge. Walk me through it, I said. She did. Formal acknowledgement of my status as contingent beneficiary. Written recognition that I had no fiduciary responsibility for past or future actions of Whitman Logistics. A separation agreement confirming I was no longer considered an officer, advisor, or informal decision-maker in the company. Voluntary disclosure cooperation with the trust administrator. Independent oversight imposed on the business for a minimum of 3 years. And one final clause, quietly tucked near the end. No contact provision. Mutual. Enforceable. My father's idea, Nina told me later, framed as preventing further misunderstandings. I almost laughed when I read it. He still thought control came from distance. Nina slid a pen across the table. Once you sign, this is done. I picked up the pen, then set it back down. Is there anything here that protects them more than it protects me? I asked. She shook her head. For once, no. I opened the folder then and turned the pages slowly, deliberately. I recognized the language. I'd read contracts like this my entire adult life. I knew where traps usually hid. There were none. They weren't generous. They weren't apologetic. They were afraid. And fear, when it's this cleanly documented, is binding. I signed. Nina countersigned. The recorder clicked off. The moment passed without ceremony. Congratulations, she said, not smiling. You're free. That word landed differently than I expected. Free didn't feel like relief. It felt like space. Wide, quiet, and unfamiliar. I left her office and walked for nearly an hour, letting the city rearrange itself around me. When I finally checked my phone, there were missed calls. Emily. Twice. A text followed. Dad signed. He didn't tell Mom until after. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I'm not surprised. Another message came quickly. He won't talk to me. He says I chose sides. I typed, then erased, then finally wrote, You didn't choose sides. You stopped pretending. She didn't respond. That night, my mother emailed me. Not a call, not a visit, an email. Claire, I hope this brings you peace. I don't recognize this version of our family anymore. I suppose none of us do. I need time. Mom. I read it once and archived it. Not deleted. Archived. Some things don't need answers. They need distance. The following Monday, the Business Journal published a follow-up piece. Whitman Logistics announced leadership restructuring and external oversight. The article quoted a spokesperson emphasizing transparency and renewed commitment to ethical governance. There was no mention of me. That, more than anything, felt like closure. At work, my manager called me into her office. I heard about your family situation, she said gently. Not details, just that it's been a lot. I nodded. I wanted you to know, she continued. There's a director-level position opening up next quarter. Compliance strategy. I think you'd be a strong candidate. I didn't answer right away. Not because I wasn't interested, but because for the first time in years, my decisions weren't reactions. They were choices. I'd like to be considered, I said finally. That weekend, I cleaned my apartment. Not in a frantic way, but methodically. I threw out old paperwork, donated clothes I no longer wore, reorganized shelves that had been neglected. In the back of a drawer, I found an invitation mock-up Emily had shown me months ago. An early draft. My name was printed on it, Claire Whitman, and guest. I looked at it for a long time. Then I folded it once and placed it back in the drawer, not as evidence, not as resentment, as a reminder, because exclusion doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it arrives dressed as practicality or peacekeeping, or family tradition. And sometimes the most powerful response isn't confrontation. It's documentation, boundaries, and the quiet decision to stop explaining your worth to people who only measure value when it benefits them. After everything was signed, something unexpected happened. Nothing. No dramatic fallout, no final confrontation, no late-night phone call where someone suddenly understood and apologized. The world didn't rearrange itself to acknowledge what I'd endured or what I'd reclaimed. It just kept going. And that, I learned, is its own kind of reckoning. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. The audit continued quietly. Whitman Logistics operated under supervision. Mark remained on leave. My father stayed out of sight. When his name appeared, it was only in footnotes and phrasing like former leadership. Emily and I didn't speak. I thought about reaching out more than once. I drafted messages in my head while standing in line for coffee or waiting at crosswalks. But every version sounded like I was trying to comfort her for a situation she had benefited from until it became inconvenient. So I didn't. One afternoon, Nina called with an update. The trust administrator finalized their position, she said. Your status is secure. And for what it's worth, they were impressed. Impressed with what? I asked. With how clean your documentation was, she replied. Most people come in emotional. You came in prepared. That was the point. The following Sunday, I went to my Aunt Rebecca's house for the first time in years. She was my mother's older sister, the one who lived out of state, the one who always seemed slightly removed from the family's internal hierarchy. She poured tea and sat across from me at her kitchen table. I saw the articles, she said. And I saw what wasn't said. I raised an eyebrow. Meaning? You were always the one they underestimated, she said. Your grandmother used to say that. I hadn't heard my grandmother mentioned aloud in a long time. She knew, my aunt continued. She didn't like how your father handled things, the business, the favoritism, but she believed you'd eventually protect yourself. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. She left me a letter, my aunt said, years ago. Asked me to give it to you if things ever went wrong. She stood and retrieved an envelope from a drawer. My name was written on it, in my grandmother's precise handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I think she trusted you, because you didn't need permission to see clearly, my aunt said. That night, at home, I finally opened the letter. Claire, if you're reading this, then the silence has finally broken. I hope you remember that being excluded is often the price of integrity. Do not mistake distance for failure. Some people only understand consequences, not conversations. Love, Grandma. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the file on my shelf. The Whitman file, the one that no longer needed updating. A week later, Emily called. Her voice was quieter than I remembered. I moved out, she said. Where? I asked. A short-term rental, she replied. Daniel and I are taking space. I didn't say anything. He says everything feels unstable now, she continued. Like he doesn't know what's real. That's what happens when stability was built on omission, I said. She sighed. I keep thinking about the wedding, about how easy it was to pretend you didn't exist. I waited. I'm sorry, she said finally. Not for what happened after, for before, for not seeing it. I know, I replied. And I meant it. But knowing didn't mean undoing. Do you think, she asked hesitantly, we can fix this? I considered the question carefully. I think, I said, we can start something new. But it won't look like what you're hoping to repair. She was quiet for a long time. I'd like that, she said eventually. After we hung up, I didn't feel relief. I felt realism. Because reconciliation, when it comes at all, comes after accountability. Not before. At work, I was formally offered the director role. I accepted it after a weekend of thought. Not because it validated me, but because it aligned with where I was going. Forward. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I saw my reflection in the glass doors. I looked the same. Same face, same posture. But something had shifted underneath. I no longer felt like I was bracing for the next exclusion. I had already survived it. And more importantly, I had stopped negotiating with people who only offered conditional belonging. That was the real turning point. Not the audit, not the contracts, not even the wedding. It was the moment I understood that family drama only has power as long as you're trying to be chosen. Once you choose yourself, the noise fades, and all that's left is clarity. The first Christmas after everything happened was quiet. No long dining table, no forced laughter. No careful seating arrangements designed to keep tensions from showing. Just me, my apartment, and a small pine tree I bought from a street vendor on my way home from work. I decorated it with a handful of white lights and nothing else. For the first time, I didn't feel like something was missing. On Christmas Eve, my phone buzzed once. A message from my father. Merry Christmas. No apology, no explanation. Just 2 words, carefully neutral. I read it, set the phone down, and didn't respond. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because silence, when chosen freely, is different from silence imposed. Emily came by the next afternoon. No gifts, no expectations. Just coffee and awkward pauses, and an honesty that felt new and fragile. I'm learning what it means to not be managed, she said at one point, staring into her cup. I nodded. It takes practice. She asked about my job. I asked about her apartment. We avoided talking about our parents, and for once, that avoidance felt healthy. When she left, she hugged me longer than usual. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not destroying everything," she replied. "Even when you could have." I didn't correct her, because the truth was, I had destroyed something. I'd destroyed the version of our family that only functioned as long as one person stayed quiet, flexible, and grateful for scraps of inclusion. And that version deserved to end. In January, the audit concluded. No criminal charges, but consequences. My father was permanently removed from operational authority. Mark was quietly bought out and required to repay a portion of the misused funds. The trust was restructured with external oversight. The house of cards didn't collapse dramatically. It was dismantled, piece by piece. I received the final confirmation in an email while sitting at my desk reviewing a compliance report. I read it once, then closed it and went back to work. Because my life was no longer on hold, waiting for justice to arrive. Justice had come quietly, professionally, without asking for my emotional labor. That evening, I took my grandmother's letter from the shelf and reread it. Being excluded is often the price of integrity. She was right. Exclusion had been the catalyst, not the punishment. If I had been invited to that wedding, if I had been allowed to sit quietly in the back and smile for photos, I might have stayed contained, useful, invisible. Instead, I was pushed out, and in being pushed out, I saw clearly. I saw how love had been used as leverage, how peacekeeping had meant self-erasure, how family had been conditional on compliance. And I learned something I wish I'd known sooner. You don't owe proximity to people who only offer belonging when you're convenient. You don't owe silence to preserve someone else's comfort. And you don't need permission to protect your dignity. Choosing yourself doesn't always look brave in the moment. Sometimes it looks quiet, legal, methodical. Sometimes it looks like signing papers instead of arguing, like walking away instead of explaining, like letting people face consequences without cushioning the fall. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. If you're listening to this and you've ever been excluded, sidelined, or made to feel like love was something you had to earn by shrinking yourself, I want you to know this. You're not difficult. You're not ungrateful. You're not imagining it. And you don't have to burn everything down to take your power back. Sometimes, the most lasting revenge is simply refusing to play the role you were assigned. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been pushed out of your own family, workplace, or circle of trust? What did choosing yourself look like for you? And if you want to hear more stories about boundaries, karma, and quiet payback, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me. Thank you for listening.